Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about Susan Sontag for a little bit now. For today, this is what is our meeting today. This week is going to be April 9th, I believe. I have you all reading an essay by Susan Sontag called The Heroism of Vision from her book on photography, which is a classic work of hers. Let's see when this was written. 1970s. It's a collection of essays that were put together mid-1970s. I have posted the essay called The Heroism of Vision on Canvas for you all. And in addition, for April, what did I say, 9th? You are to read also chapters 1 and 2 from her book Regarding the Pain of Others, which was written in 2003, and which is a later obviously a later work, but also prompted specifically by the War on Terror, 9/11, and deals with war photography more specifically. There is some overlap between these two, but also some differences, of course, due in part to the many decades that separate these two works. So maybe that's something we could talk about when we do have our class meeting, our Zoom meeting on the 9th. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to exclusively discuss the heroism of vision, and then when we have our Zoom session on Thursday, we can take up the first two chapters of Regarding the Pain of Others. Okay, so she points out a couple things here early on in the heroism of vision, some interesting claims about photography. She tells us that much beauty has been discovered by photography. Much beauty has been discovered. That's a quote by photography. Many people use photography to find and capture what is beautiful. In fact, she says that the camera has played a role in beautifying the world. So much so that photographs and not the world has become the standard of the beautiful. And here's a quote early on. We learn to see ourselves photographically. That's a quote. We learn to see ourselves photographically. It's the measure of beauty. This leads her to express the central paradox of photography. This is on page 66 in your book. I have a slightly different version. 66 in the edition that I gave you, all page 86 in mine. She says on page 66, the history of photography could be recapitulated as the struggle between two different imperatives, beautification, which comes from the fine arts, and truth-telling. The paradox of photography: beautification, truth-telling. Photography offers up beauty, it captures beauty, and it also offers a standard of reality. And she has a very nice quote from Zola on the next page. That's 67 in your edition. Zola says, in my view, you cannot claim to have really seen something until you have photographed it. You cannot really claim to have seen something until you photographed it. He said that in 1901. Her commentary on that is this: instead of just recording reality, photographs have become the norm for the way things appear to us, thereby changing the very idea of reality and of realism. So, on one hand, photography has become has offered a standard of beauty, and it has also offered a standard of reality. Early on, cameras were prized as copying machines. That is another quote, which was superior at they were superior at depicting reality because of they were superior at depicting reality because of the anonymity of this medium. The photographer saw himself as a non-interfering observer. This view quickly dissipated though, because people noticed early on, or pretty quickly, that you could take pictures of different things. The photographer betrayed choice in what he or she would take pictures of, and also the different angles, and that all is evidence of perspective. She says photography also ushered in a heroism of vision, and this is the title of this essay. And on 69, she talks about this. There is a peculiar, beginning of that paragraph on 69, there's a peculiar heroism abroad in the world since the invention of cameras, the heroism of vision. Photography opened up a new model of freelance activity, allowing each person to display a certain unique, avid sensibility. Every person could set out and discover or capture beauty, and not only that, but of course every individual, every average person had superb access to reality portrayed in itself, right, insofar as photography offered the standard of reality and the standard of beauty. She points out that photography also inaugurated a quest for the beautiful that was democratic. Anyone could do this. And beauty was discovered in surprising places, in, quote, corners of the material reality that the eye doesn't see or cannot isolate. And she gives examples of this after page 69 of, for example, Paul Strand in 1915 took a photograph which he titled Abstract Patterns Made by Bowls. In 1917, Strand turned to close-ups of machine forms, and throughout the 20s did close-up nature studies. Right, so photographers discovered beauty in places that people did not typically look. In fact, these were places and things that people tended to ignore, and that was revelatory in itself. She says that cameras changed seeing itself by fostering the idea of seeing for seeing's sake. That's a quote. Cameras changed seeing itself by fostering the idea of seeing for seeing's sake. Seeing is not instrumental, but seeing is an end in itself. Observe these fine patterns, that these often overlooked things like machine parts, right? Observation had begun to acquire a stature of moral duty, she said, because of what photography had uncovered about seeing. Too often in our everyday world, we pass by mundane images and things that we don't focus on, but there's beauty to be found in them if we would focus. And instead of, to borrow from Heidegger, instead of treating things, ready to hand, we deal with most things in the material world on a daily basis. We deal with things in an instrumental fashion. Half the time I grab this water bottle, I don't even think about it. Just grab it, take a swig, don't even pay attention to it. But photography should or does enable us to appreciate the beauty in these often overlooked things, and I imagine it would also, even in a close-up of this image, of this thing, of the surface of the thing, it would offer amazing beauty that I routinely ignore. She tells us about painting. She says that painting plagiarizes from photography, and also quotes someone who said that photography, in fact, liberated painting. And the liberation is in the sense that now painting no longer has to convey realism. I imagine beauty as well is included there, but it's obvious to see, at least for me, it's more apparent to see how photography relieves painting of any duty to convey realism. Here's another quote about what is heroic about photography. This is on page 74. This is the beginning of that new section. She says, while most people taking photographs are only seconding received notions of the beautiful, ambitious professionals usually think they are challenging them. According to heroic modernists like Weston, the photographer's venture is elitist, prophetic, subversive, revelatory. Photographers claim to be performing the Blakean task of cleansing the senses, revealing to others the living world around them, as Weston described his own work, showing to them what their own unseeing eyes had missed. Photographers are cleansing the senses, revealing to others the world around them, showing them what their own unseeing eyes had missed. Now, if we were meeting in person, this is my chance to ask you all if photography still does this, or if it's still like this. This is something I imagine we will take up on when we have our Zoom session. I also want to talk about the proliferation, the absurd proliferation of images and what that does to their power, to the power of photography, thanks to social media. About this Weston quote, though, that photographers are cleansing the senses, and they're doing some kind of they're acting as like, almost like a religious function for all of us, showing us what our own unseeing eyes are missing. She ends up disagreeing with this because she says that photographic seeing is dissociative. And this is a quote on the next page. She says, what does she mean by dissociative? Well, she says that, let's see, this is on the following page for you all. So on page 75, it says, photographic seeing, when one examines its claims, turns out to be mainly the practice of a kind of dissociative seeing, a subjective habit which is reinforced by the objective discrepancies between the way that the camera and the human eye focus and the judge perspective. These discrepancies were much remarked by the public in the early days of picture taking. Once they began to think photographically, people stopped talking about photographic distortion, as it was called. Thus, one of the perennial successes of photography has been its strategy of turning living being into things and things into living beings. This is a really interesting quote because it points out that people, we think photographically, and perhaps this is hard for us to wrap our heads around what she's talking about here, because we are now very thoroughly inured to thinking photographically now that we're since a century and a half past the advent of this medium. But at its base, she argues, photography is dissociative. It imposes discrepancies in the way that we normally see things. And I guess one way of thinking about it is like this. It perhaps was very disturbing for people the first time they saw close-ups of their of ordinary objects that they would pass by or use on a daily basis and didn't think much about. But now she says we're much more accustomed to ignoring that. And as a result, she tells us people are no longer expect photography to, quote, create a psychic breakthrough. There have been democratic impulses laid on photography, and she expresses this here. This is page 102 for me. I'm thinking this is around page 77. I forgot to note this one down. She says, but notwithstanding the declared aims of indiscreet, unposed, often harsh photography to reveal truth, not beauty, photography still beautifies. Indeed, the most enduring triumph of photography has been its aptitude for discovering beauty in the humble, the inane, the decrepit. At the very least, the real has a pathos, and that pathos is beauty. So, photography cannot help, and this is going to be a theme that she takes up in regarding the pain of others. Photography cannot help but still capturing and conveying beauty in everything that it does. This is an issue for regarding the pain of others because, of course, in that book she's talking about when photojournalists aim to capture the pain of war and the horror of war. Well, if photography has an inherently beautifying tendency, then what does that mean for the journalist, for the photojournalist's mission? That may well undermine it, and certainly it undermine its impact on all of us. But in any case, so on this page here, on page I think this is around page 77 or 78, where she talks about how photography still beautifies, nonetheless. It has its aptitude for discovering beauty in the humble, the innate, the inane, the decrepit. Even when it focuses on the decrepit and the inane, it cannot help but beautifying. She calls this photography's democratizing of the notion of beauty. This is a democratizing of the notion of beauty. And by democratizing here, I think she means that it's not so much that it empowers everybody, although it does empower everybody to try and capture and discover beauty everywhere, but it literally democratizes the subjects of beauty. It's no longer the Eiffel Tower or Notre Dame, but it is a leaf. And it could even be a tire or machine parts, right? It's democratizing in that sense. This leads her to say that there is really no difference for photographers between embellishing and ripping off the mask. She talks about some photographers, this is their mission. They are, when they're showing pictures of things, maybe the inane or decrepit, or she talks about Richard Avedon taking pictures of his dying father in 1972. This is a photographer ripping off the mask, saying, look at, the uncomfortable and harsh reality. But even in doing that, the images embellish, and they cannot help bestowing beauty on that image. She goes on to say that, therefore, photography has enlarged the notion of what is aesthetically pleasing. Where it once was maybe these things that had aura, as Walter Benjamin talked about, these rare and vaunted icons, well, again, the Eiffel Tower, the Mona Lisa, the Empire State Building. Now suddenly you can discover photography is an avenue for discovering astonishing beauty in every little object around you. Good. And again, this means that this will be problematic at times, like when we get to war photography, this tension between embellishing and uncovering. For this reason, the impact or meaning of a photograph relies heavily on the context. She talks about that next. And the profusion of photographs has a debilitating effect. Here's a quote on page 82. She says, she's talking about Wittgenstein, who was an early 20th century English philosopher. As Wittgenstein argued for words, that the meaning is the use, so for each photograph. And it is in this way that the presence and proliferation of all photographs contributes to the erosion of the very notion of meaning. The presence and proliferation of photographs contributes to the erosion of the very notion of meaning. To that parsing out of the truth into relative truths into which is taken for granted by the modern liberal consciousness. Socially concerned photographers assume that their work can convey some kind of stable meaning, can reveal truth, but partly because the photograph is always an object in a context, this meaning is bound to drain away. That is, the context which shapes whatever immediate uses the photograph may have is inevitably succeeded by contexts in which such uses are weakened and become progressively less relevant. One of the central characteristics of photography is that process by which original uses are modified, eventually supplanted by subsequent uses, most notably by the discourse of art into which any photograph can be absorbed. So this is a very rich and dense passage here. Uh, it is context. You know, this is a recurring theme that we'll come up with regarding the pain of others. But photographers may think, this, she argues, is a common fallacy for photographers, that they think that their image speaks for itself, and that the image conveys a clear message and mission to the audience. But that is hardly the case. One way of fixing that, she says, is by imposing a caption. Well, actually, that's for the next one. Sorry, that's later. She talks about the caption. But here, it is always about the context that can help fix that, or that meaning of the photograph, rather, I should say, is more variable depending on that context. And the context in which a photograph is shown and demonstrated, that also suffers immensely when there is a profusion of those photographs, of those images. And they pop up all over the place, for example. So, in general, photographs are always deficient for moralists, she argues. A lot depends, here we are talking about the caption. A lot depends on the caption affixed to the photos, and she calls the caption the missing voice. But there are problems with the caption, too. Consider this perplexing passage. This is 2 pages later, so I guess about page 84. It says this about the caption. It cannot prevent any argument or moral plea which a photograph or set of photographs is intended to support from being undermined by the plurality of meanings that every photograph carries, or from being qualified by the acquisitive mentality implicit in all picture taking and picture collecting, and by the aesthetic relation to their subjects which all photographs inevitably propose. Even those photographs which speak so laceratingly of a specific historical moment also give us a vicarious possession of their subjects under the aspect of a kind of eternity, the beautiful. I see here saying a couple things. First of all, a caption, that is the best that a photographer can hope for to pin a specific meaning and impact on a photograph. The problem is, however, that a caption, I hear her saying that a caption can never really do that, never fully or completely. A picture is always, the caption is always undermined by the plurality of meanings that every photograph carries. I'm not sure exactly what she's talking about here. Why she raises this idea of an acquisitive mentality. That brings to mind something about consumerism, which she does get into in the next paragraph here. She seems to accuse consumer society of transforming even well-intentioned photographs into beauty. She says that consumer society drives the aestheticizing tendency of photography. Indeed, consumer society is less interested in the pulling off the mask aspect. Advertisers are not so concerned, except for a few. I remember some Benetton campaigns a few years ago where Benetton thought it was being socially woke, including in its ads. I think there was like a priest kissing a nun, various things, bringing to the fore, race relations, gay rights, and the like. But in general, advertisers don't care to rip off the mask. They tend to aestheticize, and they're happy to amplify this tendency of photography. She says that the aestheticizing tendency of photography, this means that photography as a medium conveys distress. Let me try this again. This tendency means that photography as a medium that conveys distress ends by neutralizing it. So this is the thesis that I guess we should test when we get to regarding the pain of others. The aestheticizing tendency of photography means that as a medium, it conveys, that photography as a medium conveys, that medium that conveys distress ends by neutralizing it. Sorry, I'm totally butchering this. But the point being that as photography aims to convey distress, because of its aestheticizing tendency, it neutralizes it and undermines it. And this, of course, counters the notion that photographs are an aid to understanding and tolerance. Ultimately, she concludes the fact that photography conveys beauty, quote, derives from its weakness in conveying truth. And that's a very curious ending, of course, because she opened up by pointing out that photographers, Emile Zola, for example, they were so impressed by this medium because it was superior in capturing and conveying the truth. But her argument is that because of this inborn tendency to beautify, this reveals its weakness in conveying the truth. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave it there. And on Thursday, we will pick it up again and we will talk about regarding the pain of others. Okay? See you later.